A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, for a long time, the nightmare scenario in cybersecurity was the silent intruder, the ghost in the machine that sits on your network for 18 months, quietly siphoning off intellectual property without anyone being the wiser. It was the era of the digital vacuum cleaner, sucking up data in the dark. But lately, the trend has shifted towards something much louder, much more aggressive, and in many ways, far more destabilizing. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the Handala hacking group, and it is a perfect case study in this new era of performative cyber warfare. Daniel wants us to dig into who they are, how they operate, and why they seem so intent on making as much noise as humanly possible.
It is a fascinating shift, Korn. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have been tracking the Handala reporting since they first surfaced in early 24. What makes them stand out isn't just their technical proficiency, which is significant, but their methodology. They are the poster child for the hack and leak operation. While groups like APT-33 or Muddy Water have historically focused on quiet espionage for the Iranian state, the kind of long-term surveillance where you never want the target to know you were there, Handala operates with a megaphone. They don't just breach a target, they weaponize the very fact of the breach to create psychological friction within the target country, which is almost exclusively Israel.
That megaphone aspect is what caught my eye. Usually, if you are a state-sponsored actor, getting caught is a failure. It means your access gets burned, your tools get analyzed, and your mission is compromised. It is like a spy being caught with a camera in the embassy. But with Handala, the discovery seems to be the point. They want the headlines. They want the Telegram notifications popping up on people's phones at 3 in the morning. Is this a sign that Iran is moving away from traditional intelligence gathering toward pure disruption?
It is more of a diversification of their portfolio. If you look at the broader Iranian cyber doctrine, you have the quiet collectors who are looking for strategic data, and then you have the disruptors. Handala fills a specific niche in that ecosystem. They are what researchers call a state-linked persona. Whether they are direct employees of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps or a highly coordinated proxy group is still a matter of some debate among threat intelligence firms like Checkpoint and Mandiant, but the alignment with Iranian geopolitical interests is undeniable. Their goal is psychological operations, or PSYOPs. They want to erode public trust in national security, private data protection, and the basic stability of the digital state.
Before we get into the technical weeds, let's talk about that name, Handala. It isn't just a random string of characters. It carries a lot of weight in the region, doesn't it?
Handala is a famous cartoon character created by the Palestinian cartoonist Naji al-Ali. He is a 10-year-old boy, always seen from the back with his hands crossed behind him, representing defiance and the refusal to turn his face until he can return to his homeland. By adopting this name, the group is engaging in a very specific kind of branding. They are positioning themselves not as state actors, but as digital freedom fighters or activists. It gives them a layer of ideological cover, even if the technical evidence points back to a government office in Tehran.
That brings us to the forensics, because that is where the real detective work happens. When a group like Handala hits a target, they leave a trail. How do firms like Checkpoint actually connect the dots back to Tehran? It is not like the hackers leave a return address in the code, or a digital business card.
The forensic process is incredibly granular, Korn. It is like piecing together a shredded document. It starts with the infrastructure. Researchers look at the command and control servers, which are the computers the hackers use to send instructions to the malware. Handala often uses specific virtual private servers and hosting providers that had been historically associated with other Iranian operations. But the real smoking gun often lies in the code itself. Cybersecurity researchers look for code reuse. For example, Check Point identified specific obfuscation techniques in Handala's wipers, the tools they used to destroy data that were almost identical to tools used by Muddy Water, which is a known arm of Iranian intelligence.
When you say obfuscation techniques, you are talking about the way they hide their code from security software, right?
Think of it like a specific way of folding a secret note. If two different groups use the exact same complex, non-standard folding technique, you start to suspect they were taught by the same instructor. In the case of Handala, they used a custom-built packer, a tool that compresses and encrypts the malware to avoid detection, that shared significant code overlaps with previous Iranian campaigns. They also tend to use the same naming conventions for their files and the same specific errors in their English language ransom notes. It is these small human mistakes that allow researchers to build a high confidence attribution.
Let's talk about the wiper part of the equation. You mentioned they use software designed specifically to destroy data. That feels very different from the ransomware we usually hear about, where someone just wants a quick payday.
It is a crucial distinction. A wiper is purely destructive. Handala often disguises their attacks as ransomware. They will pop up a screen demanding a payment in Bitcoin, but it is a ruse. There is no decryption key because the data has already been overwritten or deleted. This creates a double-layered psychological blow. First, the victim thinks they can pay to get their data back. Then, they realize the data is gone forever. And to top it off, Handala leaks a massive cache of sensitive documents on their Telegram channel to prove they were there. They call this the Fata Morgana technique sometimes, creating a mirage of a solution when the reality is total loss.
It is a brutal cycle. And the timing seems calibrated too. I notice they tend to ramp up their activity during periods of high political tension or following specific kinetic events. It feels less like a random hack and more like a synchronized part of a larger hybrid warfare strategy.
That is a very sharp observation. We saw this back in episode 713 when we discussed Israel as a testing ground for these types of attacks. Handala's leaks are often timed to coincide with national holidays, elections, or moments of civil unrest. They don't just dump data, they curate it. They will highlight specific emails or internal documents that are likely to cause the most embarrassment or social friction. They are playing the long game of social engineering on a national scale. They want the Israeli public to feel that their government is incompetent and that their private lives are an open book.
I want to go back to the initial access vectors. How are they actually getting in? Are we talking about sophisticated zero-day exploits that cost millions of dollars on the black market, or is it something more mundane?
It is surprisingly mundane most of the time, which is actually more frightening. Handala, like many Iranian groups, is excellent at what we call end-day exploitation. This means they wait for a vulnerability to be publicly disclosed. The NNN day refers to the number of days since the patch was released, and then they race to exploit it before organizations can patch their systems. We saw them leverage vulnerabilities in Citrix NetScaler and various VPN gateways. These are the front doors of a corporate network. If you haven't patched your VPN in 48 hours, Handala is knocking.
And if the front door is locked, they go for the people inside.
Precisely. They rely heavily on sophisticated spear phishing. They will spend weeks researching a specific target, creating a persona that looks legitimate, perhaps a fellow researcher or a business partner, and then sending a highly targeted email with a malicious attachment. They often use themes related to current events to increase the click rate. Once one employee clicks that link, Handala is in. And once they are in, they don't just stop at the first computer they find. They move laterally through the network.
Explain that process of moving laterally. How do they go from a marketing assistant's laptop to the core database of a nuclear research facility?
They are very methodical about it. They use legitimate administrative tools, like PowerShell or Windows Management Instrumentation, to blend in with normal network traffic. This is known as living off the land. By using the system's own tools against it, they make it much harder for automated security software to flag them as malicious. They look for credentials in the clear passwords stored in text files or in the memory of the computer. They use tools like Mimikatz to harvest these passwords. Once they have administrative credentials, they can hop from server to server, mapping the network, identifying where the crown jewels are kept, and quietly exfiltrating data before they finally trigger the wiper.
It reminds me of what we talked about in episode 8.1 regarding the gig economy of treason. That episode focused on how Iran recruits individuals for low-level physical sabotage or surveillance via Telegram. Handala feels like the high-end, professionalized version of that. Instead of a random person taking photos of a building, you have a highly trained team of developers and operators who are essentially digital mercenaries for the state.
The professionalization is the key takeaway here. 10 years ago, Iranian cyber capabilities were seen as somewhat amateurish compared to Russia or China. That is no longer the case. The Handala operations show a high level of coordination between the technical teams, the data analysts who sift through the stolen information, and the media teams who manage their Telegram presence. They have their own branding, their own logo, and a very consistent voice in their communications. They even provide proof of hack videos where they screen record themselves navigating the victim's internal network. It is a full spectrum information warfare machine.
What about the target profile? Is it just government agencies, or are they casting a wider net? Because if the goal is to destabilize society, hitting a local water utility or a healthcare provider might actually be more effective than hitting a ministry building.
They have hit everything from academic institutions and tech companies to critical infrastructure. One of their most high-profile claims involved breaching a nuclear research facility, though the actual extent of that breach was heavily debated by officials. But you hit on something important. By targeting the private sector, they are telling the average citizen that the government cannot protect your personal information, your business, or your infrastructure. They hit insurance companies, shipping firms, and even food delivery services. It is a way of projecting power far beyond their physical borders and making the conflict feel personal to every citizen.
So, if you were a Chief Information Security Officer, a CISO in a high-risk region, how do you even begin to defend against this? If they are using legitimate tools and exploiting patches that were released yesterday, it feels like you are always one step behind.
The defensive mindset has to shift from a fortress mentality to a resilience mentality. You have to assume that a breach will eventually happen. The goal then becomes minimizing the blast radius. This means zero trust architecture, where no user or device is trusted by default, even if they are inside the network. It means robust data loss prevention tools that can flag when massive amounts of data are being moved to an unusual location, like a server in a country you don't do business with. And most importantly, it means having an offline, immutable backup strategy. If Handala triggers a wiper, but you can restore your entire environment from a secure, unchangeable backup in a few hours, their leverage evaporates.
But that only solves the data destruction part. It doesn't solve the leak part. Once the data is on their Telegram channel, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube.
That is the hardest part to mitigate. That is where the psychological impact lives. For that, organizations need a crisis communication plan that is as robust as their technical incident response plan. You have to be transparent with your stakeholders before the hackers can frame the narrative. If Handala leaks your data and you haven't said a word, they control the story. If you have already alerted your users and the authorities, you take some of that power back. You also need to monitor for pre-leak indicators. Often, these groups will stage data in specific parts of the network before exfiltrating it. If you catch them in the staging phase, you can stop the leak before it happens.
It's interesting to compare Handala to Muddy Water or APT-33. Those groups feel like traditional intelligence services. They want to know what the Israeli cabinet is discussing or what the latest defense specs are. Handala feels more like a tactical unit deployed to cause chaos during a battle.
That is exactly how the hierarchy seems to function. Muddy Water, which has been linked to the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence and Security, is the scalpel. They are looking for long-term access. Handala is the sledgehammer. It is possible that the intelligence gathered by the quiet groups is actually passed down to groups like Handala to be weaponized. We have seen instances where the initial access was gained by one group, and the final destructive phase was carried out by another. It is a highly efficient division of labor. One group finds the vulnerability, another group maintains access, and Handala comes in at the end to burn the house down and tell everyone about it.
This brings up an interesting point about attribution. If these groups are sharing access and tools, does it even matter which specific name we give them? Is the Handala brand just a convenient mask for the IRGC to wear when they want to be particularly aggressive?
In many ways, yes. For researchers, attribution is important because it helps us understand the intent and the likely next steps. If we know it is a state-linked group, we know we aren't dealing with a simple criminal looking for a payday. We are dealing with a motivated political actor with deep pockets. But for the victim, the name matters less than the impact. However, the Handala persona allows Iran to maintain a degree of plausible deniability. They can claim these are independent activists acting out of ideological conviction, which complicates the diplomatic response.
We saw a similar dynamic in episode 1316 when we talked about the crowdsourcing of espionage. The lines are blurring between state actors, ideological volunteers, and criminal mercenaries. Handala sits right at the intersection of all three. They have the resources of a state, the fervor of an ideological movement, and the tactics of a high-end ransomware gang.
And that intersection is getting more crowded. As these tools become more accessible, the barrier to entry for conducting a high-impact hack and leak operation is dropping. We are seeing more copycat groups emerging, some of which may not even be directly linked to Iran, but are using Handala's playbook because it is so effective at garnering attention. This creates a noise problem for defenders. How do you tell the difference between a bored teenager with a leaked exploit and a state-sponsored team preparing the ground for a major disruption?
That noise is a feature, not a bug, for the attackers. If you can overwhelm the defenders with thousands of low-level alerts, they might miss the one sophisticated intrusion that actually matters. It is a digital version of a saturation attack.
That is a great way to put it. And speaking of saturation, we have to look at the role of social media in all of this. Handala doesn't just wait for people to find their Telegram channel. They use bot networks to amplify their leaks on X and other platforms. They tag journalists, government officials, and influencers. They want to ensure that their message reaches the widest possible audience. They are essentially their own PR firm. They understand the 24-hour news cycle perfectly. They know that a leak on a Sunday evening will dominate the Monday morning headlines.
It's a sobering thought. We are moving into a world where a cyber attack isn't just a technical problem for the IT department. It is a national security event that plays out in real time on social media. The speed of the information cycle makes it incredibly difficult for organizations to respond effectively. By the time you've confirmed the breach, the stolen documents are already being discussed by thousands of people online.
That speed is exactly why the forensics work by companies like Check Point is so critical. They are the ones who can look past the branding and the noise to see the actual mechanics of the attack. By identifying the shared infrastructure and the code signatures, they provide the evidence that governments need to make formal attributions and pursue diplomatic or kinetic responses. Without that technical grounding, we are just guessing. We are reacting to the persona rather than the actor.
So, looking ahead, what is the next evolution for a group like Handala? We are in March of 26 now, and we've seen AI start to touch every part of our lives. I have to imagine these groups are looking at how to automate the more tedious parts of their operations.
It is already happening, Korn. We are seeing AI being used to craft even more convincing spear phishing emails, often in the native language of the target with perfect grammar and cultural nuance. We are also seeing automated vulnerability scanners that can find and exploit a new bug across thousands of servers in minutes. The window of time that defenders have to patch their systems is shrinking toward zero. In the future, a group like Handala might be able to launch 100 hack and leak operations simultaneously, completely overwhelming the national capacity to respond. Imagine 100 different companies all dealing with data leaks and wipers on the same day.
That is a dark thought, but it highlights why we need to be talking about this. The professionalization of these groups means we have to professionalize our defense. It's not just about better firewalls. It's about better intelligence sharing, faster patching cycles, and a much higher level of public awareness. We need a civil defense mindset for the digital age.
One thing that really stood out in the checkpoint research was the level of detail Handala includes in their claims. They don't just say they breached a company, they provide screenshots of internal dashboards, lists of employee names, and even photos of the physical offices taken from internal security cameras. It is a way of saying, we aren't just in your network, we are in your space, we see you. That kind of intimacy in an attack is what makes it so psychologically jarring. It moves the threat from the abstract world of data to the physical world of privacy.
It's a form of digital stalking on a corporate or national scale. And because they aren't looking for money, you can't negotiate with them. There is no middle ground with a group whose goal is simply to watch things burn and then post the video online for likes.
That is why the link to the IRGC is so significant. This isn't a side project for a few rogue hackers. This is a core component of Iran's national security strategy. They have realized that cyber is the most cost-effective way to project power and retaliate against their adversaries without triggering a full-scale conventional war. It is the ultimate gray zone tool. It allows them to inflict real pain and cause real economic damage while staying just below the threshold of an act of war.
It also allows them to maintain that plausible deniability we talked about. As long as they can point to a persona like Handala and say, that's just an independent group of activists, they can try to avoid the direct consequences of a state-on-state attack. Though, as you said, that deniability is getting thinner every day as the forensic evidence piles up.
Though that deniability is largely for domestic consumption or for sympathetic international audiences. Western intelligence agencies and the Israeli defense establishment are under no illusions about who is pulling the strings. The real challenge is deciding how to respond to an attack that is designed to be annoying and destabilizing, but stops just short of being a kinetic strike. If you launch a missile in response to a data leak, you look like the aggressor. If you do nothing, you look weak.
It's a classic game theory problem played out in the digital realm, and Handala is playing it very well. The evolution from 24 to now shows a group that is learning from its mistakes, refining its tools, and becoming more integrated into the broader Iranian military machine. They are no longer just a weird prompt or a fringe group. They are a primary threat actor.
I think the biggest takeaway for me today is the shift in focus. We spent so many years worrying about the theft of secrets, the silent intruder you mentioned at the start, but Handala shows that the exposure of secrets can be just as damaging. The vulnerability isn't just in our servers, it's in our social fabric. They are hacking the people who use the computer. They are exploiting our natural tendencies towards suspicion, anger, and fear.
Well, I think we've thoroughly deconstructed the Handala playbook today. It's a lot to process, but understanding the methodology is the first step toward building a better defense. Before we wrap up, Herman, do you have any final thoughts on where this goes next?
I think we will see an increase in the targeting of individuals, not just high-ranking officials, but mid-level employees who might have access to interesting data. Handala has shown that they are willing to dox people, releasing their home addresses, phone numbers, and private photos to make a point. It's going to make working in sensitive industries even more stressful than it already is. We need to start thinking about digital personal security as a basic requirement for professional life. If you work in defense or tech or government, you are a target, and your family might be too.
A sobering but necessary point. We need to be as disciplined with our personal digital footprints as we are with our corporate ones. This has been a deep one, and honestly, a bit of a wake-up call. The ghost in the machine isn't just stealing your files anymore. He's trying to start a riot.
It certainly has been a wake-up call. The digital frontier is only getting more complicated, and groups like Handala are the ones drawing the new maps. We have to keep up, or we'll find ourselves lost in the mirage they've created.
We definitely do. Thanks to everyone for sticking with us through this deep dive. If you found this useful, or if it sent you down a rabbit hole of your own, we'd love to hear about it.
This has been a great exploration. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flemingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the generation of this show.
This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app really helps us reach new listeners who are looking for this kind of deep dive content. It helps the algorithm find us in the noise.
You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for our full archive and all the ways to subscribe. We will be back soon with another prompt.
See you then.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our